Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and today we're talking all about fashion photography. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to helping you grow your photography skills. Raymond interviews the world's top photographers in their field to ask questions that will get you taking better photos today. Now, with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodger fan, and Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Raymond Hatfield, and I cannot tell you how excited I am to be here today. I come up with a lot of interviews, right? It's one every single week that comes out. A new episode comes out every week. And me, I'm a wedding photographer. So sometimes it's hard for me to think about other genres, right? Because there's a lot of niches in photography. In fact, someone in the group just this week posted a link to somebody who just does photography for book covers. Like, that is pretty narrowed down, you know? When you're starting out and you're thinking about becoming a photographer, you're probably not thinking, you know what I would love to do? Just shoot photos for people who are going to use the photos on the covers of books, right? So this podcast has really opened up not only my thoughts on photography, but just opened my eyes to how anybody can make it as a photographer, no matter how narrow they go in photography. And today we're talking with a fashion photographer. And fashion photography, while it's not as niched down as somebody who just shoots photos for book covers, there are lots of there's subgenres of fashion photography, and I didn't know that, but it makes sense. And today we talk about a lot of those and kind of the differences of fashion photography. So this is a really great interview, and I'm really excited. And it's with another photographer right here in Indianapolis. So great interview today. But first, I wanted to give a shout out for a iTunes review this week. This week, the shout out goes to Deb Reese. This is a fun review. Deb says, for anybody looking to learn photography from the ground up, this is your podcast. It's easy to listen to, and through Raymond's interviews and with guests and solo teachings, the podcast answers questions about cameras, equipment, and photography that a beginner may not even know to ask. That is so cool. Deb, thank you so much for that 5-star iTunes review. If you haven't left an iTunes review, I would ask you to consider doing so. It only takes a moment of your time, and who knows, you might just hear your name here on the podcast next time I give a shout out. So again, Deb, thank you so much for that review. This past weekend, I had a wedding. I want to share this real quick. I had a wedding, and it was a smaller wedding. Typically, I shoot weddings with about 150 to 200 people. But this wedding that I had on Saturday was just 20 people. It didn't even have a reception. Well, I didn't go to the reception, but the ceremony itself was just 20 people. It was this couple's closest friends and family. It was very intimate. Everybody knew each other. Everybody was very well not connected. Of course they're well connected, their family. Everybody was just, it was very comfortable. Everybody was very close with each other. And there was a different vibe to that wedding than most weddings that I go to. I think when you have like a very large wedding, there's just a lot of moving pieces. And on the wedding day, like over time, that's going to, when you have so many moving pieces, that's going to build up stress in a bride, right? Because that takes a lot of just making sure that everything is in the right spot. And this wedding that I had on Saturday, it was so stress-free and relaxed. And it wasn't even until like moments before the ceremony started, they realized, wait, are we walking out together? Do we walk out separately? Like, how is this going to work? Because what they knew the goal of the day was to get married. The goal of the day wasn't to put on this show. And it just everybody had a great time, and it was very fun to be a part of. But it was a very interesting ceremony because it took place like in a little conservatory garden with like a waterfall. And it was very, very small, a very tight little area of this conservatory. And even though it was a small wedding with only 20 people, it was packed. I mean, it was tiny. And that made shooting quite a challenge because not only did I have to cover, both sides of the aisle to get his reaction, her reaction, some wides with, the guests and then the whole bridal party as well. You had to navigate in between people, left and right, and dodge. It was very challenging, and not only that, but I realized something. I've never photographed a wedding that was behind a waterfall, and even though it was just like trickles of water coming down, it made autofocus extremely difficult because the camera would want to focus on the waterfall instead of the couple behind the waterfall. So that made it very challenging, but I mounted a GoPro on my camera to record the whole thing, and I'm going to be sharing segments of that in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group. So if you want to check that out, I highly encourage you to come join the group, and that is just by going on Facebook and searching for Beginner Photography Podcast, and you'll find the group. There's a few questions to answer. Once you do, you're going to be given access to the group, and you can check out that video. So I'm excited to share that one. Okay, let's go ahead and get on into today's interview with Steve Brokaw. Steve Brokaw is a fashion photographer here in Indianapolis, and what you're going to find out is this is a very not technical, but very list-oriented episode. So Steve shares so many ideas on like a workflow of how to get into fashion photography, which is just invaluable. A lot of times I try to ask questions that are about, your ideas. How do you go about doing something like this? And when Steve does, he says, you need this, you need that, you need to do this thing, and then you need to do these things in that order, and then get that done before moving on to this step. And it was very eye-opening into how much goes into fashion photography. So you're really going to enjoy this one. So if you're not driving, bust out a pen and a pad to go ahead and write down all the ideas just to keep up with this interview. So let's go ahead and get on into this interview right now with Steve Brokaw. Today's guest is Steve Brokaw, a fashion photographer from right here in Indianapolis. Today, I'm excited to talk about the wild and sometimes unknown world of fashion photography. So Steve, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Raymond. I really appreciate it. Sounds like it's going to be a good time.
I'm excited because fashion photography is something that me, along with a lot of other new photographers, know nothing about. Mm-hmm. We kind of look at it as like this Wild West. And I think now that as time goes on with Instagram, influencers, lifestyle photography, there's become so many kind of subgenres mm-hmm. that the whole industry of fashion photography kind of gets a little gray. So again, I'm excited to have you here today and talk to you about your experience.
Perfect.
Yeah. So before we get into all that, you have had an extensive career or time with being behind a camera. Can you tell me how you got your start in photography?
Yeah, I've been a photographer, I guess, since I was a kid. So I've always had a camera in my hand. And probably about, I'm going to say almost 20 years ago, I started to get more serious about, doing this on a regular basis. I was working professionally in the finance world, so I was had a corporate gig. And what I was doing before it was even called street photography. I was doing a lot of, just going out in the street whenever I traveled on business and just photographing all types of scenes. But what I was finding that over time I was doing more, like when I looked at my photos, there was a focus on people and a focus on like stylish looking people or people that were wearing something unusual or people that, just stood out in the crowd. So what I understood in looking at those images was that I really enjoyed what I would call portrait, people, beauty photography. And so I started to do that more as my main focus. And what I found out was to be able to do that, you really needed an environment to do it in. So about 12 years ago, I set up a studio here in downtown Indianapolis. And that's pretty much all I've been doing since then, is just focusing almost exclusively on really three genres: fashion, beauty, and portrait photography in primarily a studio setting. And it's gotten so active that a couple of years ago, I retired from my corporate gig and have been focusing almost exclusively on doing this on a studio setting. So it's really been a lot of fun. It's been quite a
Wow.
trip.
Yeah, that sounds like quite a trip for
Yeah.
sure. Especially to find kind of that passion
Hmm.
for something new, this new hobby that got you really
Right.
excited while still working in the corporate world. But I wanna go back to that moment for a minute.
Hmm.
I want to know kind of when you first picked up that camera. So when you
Hmm.
first picked up that camera, these are going to be film cameras, correct?
Right.
Okay, so I want to know. Can you talk to me about kind of that learning process of having to take a photo, wait
Hmm.
until you saw the photo, and then make decisions based on that? How did you best learn photography that way?
Yeah. Photography, whether it's film or digital, I think it has the same process. It's just a different workflow.
Yeah.
And for me, it was enjoyable just getting out with something and trying to capture an image. And what I find exciting about it, and what I think it gets a lot of people into it, is that it's a moment in time. So you take a picture of something, whether it's a dog running across your backyard, or it's on a vacation, or it's your first child's first time walking, whatever it is. That picture will only occur that one time.
Yeah.
And so what I found was there was a real passion for me, and I think for a lot of people, of capturing moments. And so that's the classic snapshots. And what I was finding is that when I was looking at all my pictures, there were a lot of snapshots.
Hmm.
And so you take a roll of film, 36 or 24, and there might be two or three images that you keep
In a
uh,
good role.
in a good roll, yeah.
Yeah.
But then it slowly migrated to digital, but it's the same process. And that is, you have to see something in your mind, hey, I really like to capture, I'm going to go on a trip to Yosemite and I want to photograph some mountains and some trails and some wildlife. And you do that and you come back and you look at the image and say, they were all kind of overexposed. So what do I have to do with whether it's a film or digital camera to make the light correct? Or you take a picture of your first child or your girlfriend or your boyfriend, and you look at the face and say, "Oh man, it's too red or it's too dark," or "Wow, we were on the beach, but all the face is too dark." Well, I was shooting with the sun in the back. So from that, you look at those images and you try to figure out, what do I need to do to get better? And just over time, you do start getting better. You find out, what, this camera doesn't work for me anymore. I need something a little bit better. So it's a process, and it's a process of learning, developing what's in your eye, what you like shooting, and then improving it over and over and over again. So it's a long journey.
Yeah, you know what I picked up most from that is the amount of time that it
Hmm.
takes.
It does.
It's not as instant. Even though now we can take a photo and just look at the back of the camera and
Hmm.
have that instant gratification, it doesn't mean that whatever lessons you need to learn from that photo are going to sink in right away. And as you were just saying, you spend the time behind the camera, and you really can't go wrong. You can't help but get better if you really do that.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that people have today, and this is one of the things that was an advantage of film, but I don't want to say, hey, film is better than digital. It's not. It's just another way of capturing an image. But in today's environment, you have a cell phone. Everybody has a camera, essentially. And I think what happens a lot of times is that people, especially with social media, they just want to put something up. They want to get something on their
Ah,
Instagram, on their Facebook, on Snapchat. They want to send something to their friends. And so what happens is that the quality of the image isn't as important as just getting some content out there. And so I think to a certain extent, there's a difference between taking a photograph and taking something just to record it. Um, and so what happens is that I think that if you're using a camera and you're doing it on purpose, it kind of forces you to get better, because you do look at that image and you say, boy, this doesn't look nice. The skin is too red, or the hair is all messed up, or
mhm.
the background doesn't work correctly. And so I think that if you're doing photography from an intentional purpose, it really forces you to get better. Versus if you're just taking snapshots to post on content, unless you're an influencer or unless you do this, because you want really high quality content, I think um, a cell phone can make you a little sloppy, to be honest with you, especially if you're going to put in a lot of filters, if you're going to use a lot of, just take 58 shots and just find the one that you like the best.
Yeah.
If you're doing that professionally, you're doing that with a client, you can't do that. I
Hmm.
mean, you'll work with that client once. So I do think that, you really kind of need to focus on what you want to do with your photography. And if you just want to take snapshots and put it up on Instagram, just, just do it.
Yeah.
But if you want to do it where you're a starting photographer and you may want to do it professionally, or you just want to do it for a hobby and want people to look at your image and say, wow, that's really nice, you need to do it with an intent, and you need to learn, you need to develop. But it happens over time. It doesn't happen right away. And that's one of the big challenges that I think a lot of people have. They see a photographer, they see Instagram images, and they think, wow, that's so good, I want to do that. And they get very frustrated because, they don't see that image quality right away. And so they say, okay, well, I need to get a better camera. No, you don't need a better camera. Or
Yeah.
I need better lights. No, you don't need better lights. You just need to improve your eye.
Hmm.
So it is a process.
So how do you improve your eye? If, say, I kind of take me back to when you were uh, doing street photography,
Mm-hmm.
right? Before you were even really considering doing this professionally, or going into this field. Uh, would you say that you had an ability to see lines and light while you were out, or how did that develop?
No, not at all. Not at start. I mean, when I first started, you look at images and you think, man, these are great. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just the best. And then you show it to somebody else and they say, oh, it's nice. Or you put it up on Instagram or Facebook. And I mean, I was doing it before those, but you put it up today and you get, 25, 30 likes and you think, wow, I'm the best. But you put it in front of somebody who does it professionally, or you look at high quality content, somebody that you inspire to be like, and you look at it and you say, ooh, this isn't good.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's just over time. So a good example is like with street photography. I've got a good friend, Valerie Jardin, who I think you've interviewed recently.
Absolutely.
And she was one of the people that I used to follow and I used to get inspired by. She has a very unique eye. She has a very unique way of using light. And so she was somebody that inspired me on the street photography side. And so I would look at her images and I would say, okay, I see how you're using light. I see how you're interacting with people in the scene. So you get inspiration from people like that, and you look at their work. You don't necessarily copy it, but you get inspiration from it. So let's say you're doing landscape work and you're a brand new landscape photographer. Well, then what you do is you go and you look at other landscape photographers that inspire you. You go onto Pinterest, you go on to Instagram, you use hashtags to find work, and you see their work, and you see what makes it nice. What inspires me? Is it the saturation? Is it the way they use the light? And you get that inspiration. Then you go out and you practice, and there's nothing that can beat practice. And so you just go out. You take your camera with you every day. You keep it in your car, you keep it in your purse, you keep it in your backpack. And when you go out and you see something, you're out at lunch, take some shots. You're on a vacation, take some shots, and just constantly work at it. So it's a process. It's an evolution, and you've just got to constantly look at your work. You've got to self-criticize yourself. You've got to figure out what worked, what didn't work, and then you put it back out there and you try again. The other thing that's important, and I think this is really nice, that a lot of people have today that I didn't have when I was first starting out, is that there is this social ability. And because of this social ability, you can put your content out there and you can ask really high quality photographers, what do you think about this?
Hmm.
And most of those photographers will take time and they'll respond back to you. You'll connect with them, whereas you could never do that previously.
Right.
And, a lot of times photographers will want to help other photographers and they'll tell you, you know what, I love your work, but maybe you ought to take a look at the way the sun is hitting the face of an individual, or, you're doing too much backlighting. So practice, look at things that inspire you, um, look at individuals that inspire you, and then just go out and practice, practice, practice.
That was like super actionable. If
Mm-hmm.
anybody is listening right now and didn't take anything away from
Right.
that, then they're just not listening.
Yeah, and I
That
think
was
one of
great.
the things that's important too is a lot of people say, well, I look at somebody, let's say like a Valerie Jourdain, and she travels all over the world and she goes to different locations. And so, it's because of her location. And she
Oh,
gets good shots because she's in Paris, or well, she's sponsored by Fuji, so she has some of the nice cameras. No, no, that's not it. If you gave her an inexpensive camera and put her in a small town USA, she'd still get amazing work. So
I
you,
would love to do that. I bet
yeah,
that she would thrive in a situation
oh
like
yeah,
that.
it's great because she has that eye.
Hmm.
So the way you get that eye is you just practice.
Yeah.
So, like I said, if you're just starting out and you have a brand new camera that your parents got you at Costco, or you have your cell phone, just go out and shoot some shots, and you can select something. So, let's say today I'm going to shoot the color green. So you go out, and I'm just going to keep my eye open for things that are green, or I'm going to just shoot shadows.
Hmm.
People walking through shadows, or I'm going to photograph doors. So come up with a concept and then go out and shoot it, and you do it over and over and over and over again, and you'll find out pretty soon. I'm the best person that I know that shoots doors.
Yeah.
So I can't stress this enough. It's about practice and just being there. If you don't have your camera, it doesn't help.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that was great. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
sharing that. So okay, so we've talked a little bit about street photography there.
Mhm.
Let's transition a little bit more into the fashion side of things.
Sure.
Uh, you mentioned that going out, you noticed that a lot of your photos had a similar aesthetic and
Right.
seemed kind of fashion. When did you decide to, uh, like with intention, move towards fashion photography?
I'm going to say probably about 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And I think it's important that people understand when I talk about, or in the concept of fashion, fashion is a broad genre. So essentially what you're doing is that there is really very few pure fashion photographers that all they do is photograph clothing,
Mhm.
or they photograph a scene for a magazine. Generally, when people say they're a fashion photographer, they're shooting people, they're shooting beauty work, they're shooting uh, portfolio work, and that almost always includes fashion along with it. So, as an example, if we did a typical portfolio shoot for an agency, that model is going to have fashion brought in, or they're going to
Mhm.
bring in fashion themselves. And the photographer or the art director is going to say, you know what, we need to have 5 different looks. We need 2 casual looks, let's say, more of a business style look, and one high end fashion. Um, so you'll work with a designer, or you'll work with a store, or you'll work with the model, and they'll bring in those clothes. And so fashion is part of it. So you're doing a portfolio shoot that includes fashion. So it's important that when a lot of people say, "Hey, I'm a fashion photographer," they think, "Okay, I'm just doing work for, a high-end brand." Very few people do that.
Yeah.
But what I found was that I migrated to that because honestly, it was part of the beauty work I was doing, and also it's a very challenging art form because what happens is that you have to mix it with proper lighting, you have to match it with proper editing, you have to have the correct environment. You're working with a lot of people because you could have the best fashion in the world, but if the model or the subject has terrible makeup or terrible hair, they're not going to be looking at the fashion because they're going to be distracted by the fact that the hair's flying away.
Of course.
Or if you may have the best fashion designer come in and you might have the best camera in the world, but your editing skills are terrible, then your clothing looks poor.
Mhm.
You may have the best fashion, the best editing skills, but you don't light it correctly. And so the top of everything looks well lit, but now the bottom of the clothing looks poor. So what I really liked about it was the immense challenge of doing that type of photography so that you could have an image that came out and like, wow, that's really something else.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly challenging. In fact, just the other day, somebody in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group posted something. I believe that they posted a photo and asked how they could edit it
Hmm.
to look like a fashion shoot.
Right,
And my response was simply that, Photoshop doesn't make a fashion photographer.
right,
I would argue that if that was the case, anybody could show up, take any photo that they wanted, and then
right.
create a fashion photo out of it. And I would argue that as a fashion photographer, you have to know your camera, your lighting, your
Hmm.
composition, your interaction with a model more than just about anybody else.
Right,
And then the editing is just kind of on top. Does
right.
that sound about right? Just on top?
Yeah, I think So think about if let's say you're just starting out and you want to do a fashion shoot, or you want to do a fashion centric photo shoot. You have to have basically everything. And when I say everything, first of all, you have to have the proper equipment. So it's just assumed, because we're talking about a photography podcast, that everyone's going to have a camera and have a basic skill level of, how to turn it on, how to
Mhm.
shoot, in raw, or you can shoot in manual, but maybe you're still in auto. But you have to have the basics understanding of your equipment. Secondly, is you need to have a location. So, is it going to be in your house? Is it going to be outside? Is it going to be in a studio? Is there going to be some sort of a street scene? You have to understand what the location is. And so, if you have a location, how are you going to control the sound? How are you going to control the temperature, the wind, people walking behind you? So, that has to be thought out, the logistics of it.
Mhm.
Then you have to have the people that go into it. So, let's say that you have three pieces of clothing that you want to shoot. Well, you need the proper model that's going to wear those clothes. It's got to complement their skin. It's got to complement their hair color. You have to have the proper person for that, because that has to be so the clothing fits correctly on the person. Then you have to decide about the hair and makeup. Okay, are you going to have the model do it themselves? Are you going to do it yourself? You're going to bring in a team. How do you hire that team? Where do you get that team? Then you have to physically do the shoot. So you have to coordinate it, get everybody there on time. You have to make sure everybody shows up. It's going to be a long shoot, 3-4 hours. You're going to have clothing. What about, some place to go to the bathroom, some place to change? Then once you do that, then you actually have to edit the images. So the editing is going to be, am I going to use just Lightroom? Am I going to use Capture One? Am I going to use, Photoshop? Then you have to deliver your product to your client. So is that client the model? Is it a boutique? Do they want it so they're going to blow it up on a billboard? Are they going to put it just on their Instagram page so it determines the size? What type of format? Is it appropriate? Is it consistent across all images, so you don't have the color grading different in every shot? So it is a very, very broad thing, and that's what I like about it, because
It sounds like it.
it is it's a very complex process, but at the same time, that shouldn't discourage people.
Mm.
And the reason is that that's the far end. But very rarely does somebody come in knowing everything about it. So you could have a friend, you could have your camera, you could have them wear something, you could go outside and you could practice with light, in the shade, out in the street. Get a piece of white foam core and use it as a reflector. Put something in front of the lens. Have some wind blowing through their hair. You could do all types of things, and you could just do it in your backyard. And you
Yeah.
could practice that, and you could say, wow, that's really good. Okay, now what I'm going to do that's different. So now I'm going to have something where it's not going to be out in my backyard. It's going to be against a white wall. Or it's going to, so, okay, it's against a white wall. So you're going to do it inside your house, but now you have a lighting issue. Okay, so what am I going to do with lights? Am I going to use the overhead lights? Well, now you got a temperature issue, a color temperature issue. Am I going to use a window light? How am I going to avoid harsh versus soft light? So that's the way, just with some very basic stuff, you can do some amazing work. And again, it's something you just build up on.
Yeah, clearly just grows over time.
It does. It does.
Almost with like any hobby. But I love your technical approach to it. I love that you're breaking it down step by step. And I know that anybody who's listening, once again, who is interested in fashion photography at all, is really going to enjoy everything that you shared there.
Yeah.
So when it comes to models, though, I think me personally, as somebody who's never shot fashion before, whenever I don't even know like all of the subgenres of fashion photography,
Right.
but I would say that if you were to just ask me to do a fashion shoot and it would come to like the posing of the model, I would think that the models, that fashion photography is all about like hard lines and angry looking models. Is that right at all? Am I like very far off?
Well, not very far off. So a lot of people think about, when you talk about fashion photography, most people think of two things. So number one is what's called commercial or catalog work. So let's say you go to you go online and you look at Kohl's, And you'll see the focus is on very clean, usually very smiley, very well lit, evenly lit looks. So that's more for you're showing off the clothing.
Hmm.
So basically, the model, and I hate to use this word, as a coat hanger. They're just
Yeah.
sitting there. They're just keeping the clothes up. They're properly fitting the clothes, but that's not the main focus of. The focus is the clothing. Then there's editorial, and editorial is what a lot of people think about. So that's the runway models. That's um, the magazines. That's usually the moody looks, not smiling. Generally, you can have all types of fashion, but the idea is that you're setting a mood, and the
Hmm.
mood is what attracts people. So you see some, let's say, some very hard looking people, or you see some hard lighting, and it's a very dramatic look. Oh, okay, I want to look that way. So if I wear these clothes, I'm going to look that way. Well, maybe, but it's the whole setup. So then there's other subgenres. So there's like lifestyle. So let's say you see a photograph of Starbucks coffee, and you see two people sitting at a table in a Starbucks, and they're smiling and they're holding their lattes, and they look so happy together. So you say, man, if I go to Starbucks, that's the way it's going to be for me.
Yeah.
So that's more of a lifestyle. Or you see somebody coming out of a shop, like a boutique, and they're holding two shopping bags, and they've got a nice clothing on, and they're walking out a big smile on their face. You say, wow, that person looks amazing, and they look so happy. So I better go to that boutique. That's more of a lifestyle. Then you can have others like fitness. If you're in it, like in a gym, yoga yoga studio, you can have swimsuits. You can have fit models, that are a proper size for a specific clothes. So there's all types of genres. But most people think about, when you do fashion work, if you're doing something for publication, or you're doing something where you want to set a mood, that's editorial photography. And so you want an editorial model. If you're doing something for publication in a catalog or for a website, that's generally commercial. If you're doing something for somebody who wants content for their influencer page or their Instagram, that's more lifestyle. So
Yeah.
there's different types of photography, and it's a different type of lighting. It's a different type of mood. Sometimes it's a different type of model. Um, and so you have to really understand what the client wants. So if you're starting out and somebody has come to you, a local boutique, and says, hey, I'd like you to shoot for me. And let's say you've never done it before. The first thing you need to ask them is, what style do you want? Is this going to go into a magazine? Is it going to go on your website? Do you just need content for your Instagram? Or is this going to go into a publication? What type of shop is it? Is it a youth shop? Is it it's nothing but haute couture? Is it reconstructed fabric clothing? So you have to really understand what you're shooting, and that's going to determine, the style of your shoot and who you hire for it.
Yeah, I would imagine. I feel already a bit overwhelmed with the amount that goes into fashion photography. I'm glad that there's others in the world like you who thrive in
Right.
conditions like this. So let's say that the boutique comes to us and they
Hmm.
say, "This is what we want. We know what style we want.
Right.
Here's the clothes."
Hmm.
Is it on you as the fashion photographer to hire the model
Hmm.
and even do the uh, 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 what's the word I'm looking for? Just like the
The
fashion
styling.
styling?
Yeah.
Yeah, the styling, or is it on them? How does that work?
Yeah. It's really depending upon both the client, the budget, your experience, the equipment, the location. But bottom line is, fundamentally, the person that's hiring you. So let's say there's a local boutique that's launching a spring line that's coming in, and they've hired you because they've heard your name, or you're the friend of somebody to do the photography. So you're the one that's being hired. You're the photographer. You are responsible for basically everything. So unless there's an art director or a creative director who's hired you, the photographer is the one that basically does everything. You are the
Mm,
boss. So what'll happen then is that you have to determine, again, it's based upon the budget, if it's for free, a time for print type of setup, or if it's a paid shoot, you have to determine what the budget allows. So let's say that the boutique is going to pay you $200, and in return, they get 10 images.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'm just throwing those things out.
Sure.
And they're going to use those for their online website. And they want a consistent look, which means they want just one model. So, and they want it against, they have a wall in their shop and it's a white wall, and we want everything shot against that. Okay, well, then you know where your location is, but you need to hire a model. So the first thing you need to ask is what type of clothing. Is it youth clothing? Is it more professional styled? You know, like going after work, going before work. You know, what's that clothing like? And then based on that, you determine what type of model you want. And then you can either hire a friend, somebody that they've recommended, or you can go to an agency and hire the model. Then you need to determine if, based upon the model and your budget, do you need somebody to work on hair and makeup? If it's something that's going to be a distance where you're focusing on clothing, it's not that critical, but you want to have somebody that can do their hair and makeup because it's a full package.
Yeah.
But it's the photographer that plans all that out.
Gotcha.
And so it's something where generally somebody who's just starting out, the best thing to do is to apprentice with somebody or to assist somebody. Because, you know, really there's no book that you can read. I mean, there's a lot of websites, there's a lot of YouTube videos on how to do it. But the best thing to do is just get in there and start doing it. And the best way to do it without looking like a complete idiot is to be an assistant for some shoot. But if you don't, there's some basics. The basics are you need to know where the location is. Is it going to be street work? So you can just do it outside on the street, like on the sidewalk in front of the boutique.
Mhm.
Is it inside the boutique, or do you need to rent a studio? Then there's the lighting. How do they want it lit? They want it well lit because it's going to be in a catalog. Okay, you need some sort of lighting. So is that going to be studio lighting? Is it going to be ambient lighting? Or is it going to be sunlight? Then you have to determine, okay, if it's sunlight, what's the weather like? Is it going to be cloudy? You know, is it going to rain? Is it going to be a studio? Okay, is there a studio? Does the studio come with equipment? Do you have to bring my own equipment? What's the cost? So you have a location issue. Then you have an issue about the model. You know, do I hire a model? Are you going to provide the model for me? What's the budget for the model? You know, then once you know what the budget is, who do I hire? Do I go to an agency? So there's some basic steps that you can follow.
Sure.
And it's really just a checklist type of thing that you can do. But once you do it once or twice, you find out it's fairly easy.
Yeah.
But
Repeat a lot of the same steps.
It's always the same step. It's a workflow.
So you mentioned obviously the agency there, a modeling agency. When I think of an agency, I think of like having to like hire a model, I guess,
Yes.
which is the point. So that I didn't get my point across there very well. But I'm thinking like as a photographer, maybe first time, second time, only done this a handful of times.
Right.
Are we too small to use an agency? How big of a job are we looking at to utilize something like that?
No, an agency is a business. And the business is to make money. And the way they make money is to book out models. So they're representing models. And so an agency they do a lot of other things. They develop models, they place models, but fundamentally their job is to put models out to clients that are going to use that model to be photographed.
Yeah.
And so they do that for a fee. And you pay that agency a fee. And for that fee, they will tell you, you know, this is what we can make available. And you either direct book somebody, you say, I want, you know, this person, this male model that's on your website, or you do a casting where you say, you know, send me 5 comp cards of 6'2" guys because I'm doing a shoot for a brand that, you know, wants to photograph a guy. So you're working with that agency and they provide you a list of models that are available for hire. Then it's just basically like any other business. You know, when do you need them? You know, will there be food provided? How long do you need them? This is how we'll invoice you. What's your licensing needs? So it's a basic fundamental process. The challenges with hiring a model is that the agency is going to check you out.
Sure.
They're going to want to make sure that you have a reasonable reputation. You know, what's your fee structure? So if you say, hey, look, I'm going to pay $100 for 4 hours, well, they're not going to send you their top model. They're going to send you probably somebody that's in development, a new face. And for something that's let's say a starting photographer, that's fine.
Yeah.
You may have to spend a little bit of time of coaching them or directing them or posing them because they're new. But if you have a big budget and you direct hire somebody and say, I want this model, and they've been on the board for 5-6 years, you may not need to direct them. You just show them the mood board and they go. So working with an agency can be frustrating the first time or two, but fundamentally it's no different than hiring a plumber, actually. You call up the company, you say, this is my job, this is what I need. They'll say, okay, this is who we have available, and this is our rate, and you decide whether you want it, and they come in, they show up, and they do the work, and they leave. It's fundamentally that way.
So with a plumber, I know nothing about plumbing. So it
Uh-huh.
makes sense that I'm going to reach out and
Right,
hire a professional. Um, Otherwise, I would do it myself.
right.
But with fashion photography, uh, do you have to have any sort of fashion sense personally to, do you think, be able to thrive as a fashion photographer?
Yeah, yeah. You need to know the industry. You need to know style. You're not necessarily the person that's going to be doing the styling,
Mhm.
but you need to know that, okay, if you're shooting, uh, you're shooting a male model and you're shooting for a boutique, you need to know how to pose them. You need to know what looks good together. You need to be able to watch the clothing to make sure that it's sitting correctly. You've got the buttons buttoned up correctly. If it's some fashion where they've not taken the tags off because they can just put it right back up on the rack, you need to make sure the tags aren't showing. So yeah, you need to have a sense of what looks good and what doesn't look good. You also need to understand how the lighting works. This pose may not be appropriate for the scene. So yeah, you need to have a certain sense of it. And the way that it's very, very simple to figure this out. The best way to do is if this is something you're serious about doing, then you don't need to take a class on it. You don't need to go to school on it. Just get some fashion magazines, read them, look at them. This is the classic, look at the pictures, and just understand, how are people being posed? What does the fashion look like? Is it age appropriate? What does their hair look like relative to the fashion? What type of makeup is being used relative to the fashion? And what you'll find over time as the photographer, because you're controlling things.
Yeah.
If a model comes in and you're doing something very youth-like, let's say it's a 16-year-old model and they're doing for a youth boutique, and the makeup artist puts some really over-the-top makeup on. Whoa, that doesn't work. That's
Yeah.
that's more of an editorial style. But if you don't understand that, then you're going to have these images where it's very youthful looking, but you've got makeup that's not appropriate. Or if you're going to do something where it's going to show off a certain, let's say, the top. Well, you got to make sure that the setting is correct, so the top set comes out, and you got to make sure that the makeup or the hair doesn't cover the theme; it doesn't take over. So you need to understand this stuff, and so there is a certain amount of training that you need to have, an understanding of the industry. The other thing that's really important is that you got to understand what's in style.
Yeah.
I mean,
And for that reason alone, I don't think I could ever be a fashion photographer.
yeah, I mean, the thing is that that's why a lot of times I leave the styling to a stylist,
Mhm.
because what may look good for me, what's good in my eye, may be a little outdated.
Mhm.
It may not be contemporary for today. It may have been contemporary 2 seasons ago. So you do have to have a sense of style. You have to sense of what's contemporary today, and that's why there's designers and there's stylists out there that do that for you.
Stylist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank God for stylists out
Yes.
there helping all the people like me,
Well,
at least.
the way I look at this is that one of the things about fashion, beauty, portrait photography is that it's truly a teamwork sport.
Hmm.
It, you're not a senior photographer. It's not like landscape photography or street photography. You just go out and do it yourself. What you need to do is you need to be good at what you do. So if you're a photographer and you want to get into that genre, you have to understand your aspects of it, how to use your camera, how to light, how to edit, how to do the business skills. But you're not going to learn how to do makeup. You're not going to learn how to do hairstyling. You're not going to learn how to design fashion. You're not going to learn how to dress somebody. that's why there are people who that's what they do. So in this industry, it's all about building a team and making sure that you know who's reliable, who has, it's on point for their team, for their skill set, and you bring them together, whether it's a collaboration or it's a paid shoot. And so really, as a beginning photographer who thinks, oh my gosh, this is amazingly complex, and so I don't want to get into it, but I really want to get into fashion photography, but I can't because it's so complex. Just focus on your thing. Become good at your thing, but start collaborating with people who are good at their thing.
Yeah.
And then form that team. And you could have, I have the same makeup artist I go to all the time, the same hairstylist all the time. I have one model I work with all the time, or a couple of models, or I have one agency that I work with all the time. Just keep working with them, but focus on your part of the shoot.
Of course.
Yeah.
As somebody just starting, looking to bring somebody on, what position would you recommend to be the first to bring on to build your team?
Probably the model last. Generally speaking, in the fashion world. So if you're really truly interested in going to fashion, the person that generally I hire first is the makeup artist. Because the makeup artist complements the clothing, complements the face, complements the mood. So if you have somebody that is, excuse me a second.
Yeah, no worries.
For some reason, I'm going to turn my phone on mute. Sorry about that.
No worries at all.
Our connected world.
I get it. Trust me, I know. So suddenly my phone rings. It's the phone. It's the iPad. It's the kid's iPad out there in the living room. My computers.
Oh my goodness.
My watch now. So
yeah. I just got a new watch and it rings there. So generally, if you're going to go into the fashion world, ultimately you need to have a team. But generally, what I do is that I've worked with makeup artists first, and the reason is that the makeup on a fashion shoot is just as important as the clothing. So the clothing will change. The people you work with, the designers may change, the stylists may change, the stores that you work with may change, but you can use the same makeup artist constantly.
Yeah.
And so generally what will happen is that you start working with the makeup artist and they'll start understanding what your style is. They'll start understanding, okay, this is going to be a standard editorial beauty shoot. We're going to be focusing on waist up and we're going to be focusing on a hairstyle. Okay, well, then they're going to know this is the type of makeup we're going to apply on it. Once you develop that relationship, they form a critical part of the team. The next person you generally work with is a hairstylist. Mm-hmm. And the hairstylist, sometimes you have both what's called a hair makeup artist, where they do both. And in most situations, you can work with a hair makeup artist that they do both. And that's fine. But sometimes you want to have somebody that specializes. So like in most of my shoots, I have a separate hair stylist and a makeup artist, because somebody, let's say that has really long hair and you need it styled properly, they may not know how to do it, right. So you want to have somebody that's their skill set. And so sometimes you work with different types of hairstylists. And then lastly, it's usually the designer or the stylist. And sometimes the designer is the stylist. So generally what you do is you just have a list of people that you work with, and based upon, the type of shoot, you reach out to those people. Then once you have that team put together, then you hire the model.
I want to talk a little bit more now about the business side of being a fashion photographer. As a wedding photographer, a couple, they find me, they pay me money, I show up to their wedding, and then it's over. With fashion photography, it's a little bit more complicated. Can you tell me just kind of the basics of how the industry works? Hey, Raymond here. And if you're listening to this, it means that you are listening to the free version of today's podcast, which means that you are missing out big time. If you become a premium member, not only do you unlock the full interview with today's guests, where they share so much more valuable information on how to become a successful photographer, but you also get access to the entire back catalog of past interviews with some of the world's most renowned and experienced photographers, who open up and share how they got to where they are and what they would do if they had to start all over again today. Now, if you want to find out become a premium member by heading over to patreon.com/beginner photography podcast, or just head on over to beginnerphotographypodcast.com and click the link on our homepage. That's it. I hope to see you there. I was just thinking, I just had an idea, and I got this from a video that I saw a long time ago, but something that might be interesting to do as a photographer is not to critique other photos, but like I would say as a fashion photographer, if you see an image or like, you know, an advertisement out in the street, you could do like a quick little Instagram story or something of like, you see this, like, I really like this aspect of the photo. This was a really great job. You know, photographer captured this thing great, or something like that. Or give critiques, you know, that I don't know why I said that. That just popped into my brain and I thought I'd share it.
No, it's good. I think one of the things is it's about social interaction. What I've found is that most people like working with people. So they want to make sure that you're a real live person, that you're sociable, that I can interact with you, because as a photographer, you are working with another individual in my genre and your genre. And so they have to be comfortable with you.
Yeah.
So they've got to understand, well, you know, Steve likes cats and he's got a studio and, you know, he's of this age group and, you know, so he likes this type of music. Well, they've found that out because may have followed me on my social media. And then, so it's more casual, it's more comfortable versus somebody coming in and say, oh my gosh, I got to work with a guy who's my grandfather's age. And it's maybe a little intimidating because I've never been into a studio before. I've never worked with a hair and makeup artist. So they're super tense. And so it doesn't come out well versus, you know, comfort level of just knowing these things. And the way you do that is by being a real live person on your socials. So it might be simply, you know, you go out and on your stories, you take an image of, you know, that billboard and say, you know, I really like that. I like the way that the lighting was done on that. Or, you know, you take a picture of outside of a department store of a window with some clothing and say, wow, that's really nice. I like the way they've, you know, they've set that up. So, you know, you show them that that's what you do. That's what your real life looks. And I think that that's why the story side of your social media is good, because you can just pretty much put anything on there.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that do very well by developing their following just by developing a good storyline. The thing that I found, though, is you really need to be consistent with it. So people are watching it because, or looking at it because it's of interest to them. So I've always learned, just don't put anything political out there.
Yeah.
Don't put anything that all of a sudden, you know, you want to see one thing, but they throw something else at you. So you need to be consistent. So it's just like your style. But it's a good idea. The one thing you commented on, Raymond, that I'm a little uncomfortable with, and that's about critiquing people.
Sure.
What I've learned over time is that everybody has a style. Everybody has an interest. What motivates you may not motivate me. And so what I've learned is that I generally don't criticize people's images, even if I've have years of experience and they're just starting out and they ask me, how's this image look? You know,
it's hard to answer because you're not that photographer.
Well, what I always tell people is that if you like it, then it's good.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
From a technical aspect, I might have these suggestions, but from a aesthetic standpoint, if you like it, if your friends like it, then it's a good image.
Yeah.
But, you know, from a technical aspect, I might work on the lighting a little bit, but I don't criticize the photographer. I just generally don't criticize the overall image, but I might critique an aspect of it, a technical aspect of it.
Yeah. I apologize if my intent came off wrong.
No, not at all. I think what's important, though, is there's a lot of people, especially new people, who once they start getting good, they think that what they can do is they can
be a judge.
They can be a judge.
Yeah.
And trust me, I've had a few people come to me that's like, you know, they'll comment on some of my images, and you know, it may be a legit thing, but I sit there and think, okay, well, let me look at your stuff.
Yeah.
And I look at it, it's like, well, you know that the lighting is really off on this. So I just, you know, it's about casting stones type of thing.
Right. Exactly. And it's hard when, like you said, you know, everybody kind of has a different eye. Everybody has a different style. Everybody's life experiences have brought them to a different point. And there's a lot of people who shoot, you know, very dark and moody, and there's a lot that shoot very light and airy. And that doesn't mean that either one is right or wrong. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really, really important for new photographers, especially, is that don't worry about what other people think about your image. If you're just starting out, do it because you're having fun. Don't start off thinking, I'm going to do photography to make money. Because if you do, then it becomes a job.
Yeah.
Do it because you enjoy it. Do it because there's a passion. Do it because I would do it even if I don't get paid. That's going to be a successful photographer. But if you say, you know what, I'm going to become a fashion or portrait photographer because, you know what, I'm going to make X number of dollars a month, and this is going to be my life's goal and my career, then you know what, you're going to just have another job. You might as well go work at Walmart, because it's an 8 to 5 type of thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know any more of a motivational way to end the podcast than that right there,
Yeah.
Steve. That was wonderful.
Good.
Before I let you go, can you let the listeners know where they can keep up with you online?
Sure. I'm pretty active in social media. On Twitter, I go by my name, just Steve Brokaw. Almost anything I can be found with that. Instagram, Stephen Brokaw. My commercial site for my portfolio is StephenBrokawPhotography.com. And then, as you might know, I also run a modeling agency, or at least I'm the business director of a modeling agency here in town. And that's scenemodels.com. And I'm sure you can put all the links in the show notes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Also, side note, do you still keep up with your film blog?
I do, yeah.
You do?
I,
Perfect.
I haven't done anything recently because I did a little personal bucket list thing this year. I rode my bicycle across the United States.
Wow,
And
really?
yeah, so I left the end of February and just got back about 2 weeks ago.
Oh my goodness.
So I kind of put everything on hold for about 2.5 months.
Yeah, I would imagine the amount of training and preparation, especially just hearing just how your brain works in preparing for a single
Oh,
shoot, how it must have
trust
gone
me,
for an
it took
entire.
me a year planning for that thing. But no, yeah, I do a lot of film. I shoot probably 5 to 6 rolls of every 2 weeks. So
Wow,
it's
wow.
it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love it. Well, like you said, I will leave links to all of those things in the show notes.
Perfect.
And Steve, I just got to thank you so much for sharing everything that you did, and I know that the listeners really appreciate it. So thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it too, Raymond. And best of luck on the podcast. I think it's great what you're doing, and we ought to run into each other sometime soon.
We're gonna make that happen.
Yeah, definitely.
What did I tell you? Did you fill up a notebook or two? I know that I did. This was such a fun interview for me because very very rarely do you get a podcast guest who just knows their stuff so well and then lays it out in just such a clear order. Right? There's been plenty of times where, especially because this is like, photography is artistic. It's an art, and it's hard to put a process on that. But we weren't talking so much about the photography side of the art itself, but how to because that's almost the easiest part. It's just doing what you love, right? Creating the art is just finding out what you love and then doing more of that. All of the technicals are what is really going to trip you up, Oh, do I hire the makeup artist? Does an agency hire? And Steve broke that down today. And that was so valuable. And I hope that you got a lot out of this interview, because I know that I did. So Steve, if you were listening right now, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you did. Seriously, I mean, it was a lot, and even expanding on that just a tiny bit could become a masterclass into becoming a fashion photographer. So again, I thank you, and I know that the listener thanks you as well. Okay, that is it for this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I want you to get out there. I want you to shoot as much as you can. I want you to stay safe. I want you to focus on yourself. And that's it. All right. I love you all.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a review in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. And continue the conversation with Raymond and other listeners of the podcast by joining the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group today. Thank you. We'll see you again next week.